We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Leslie Playa. I'm the Executive Director of SAFE Project. Welcome to our Recovery Month webinar series. Today's presentation is How We Think About Substance Use Matters with Dylan Dunn. Following today's webinar, you will receive an email with a link to the recording. Please post any questions you have in the chat. We will also provide a few links related to the training in the chat as well. Before we get started, a little about SAFE Project, followed by our presenter's bio. SAFE Project is a national 501c3 nonprofit committed to overcoming the addiction epidemic in the United States. Established in 2017 by Admiral James and Mary Winnefeld after the tragic loss of their 19-year-old son, Jonathan, due to an opioid overdose, SAFE Project aims to save lives impacted by substance use and mental health challenges through overdose prevention and response, education on stigma, and development of prevention and recovery programs. SAFE Project also provides tailored guidance and training within its 4 key initiatives: safe campuses, safe communities, safe workplaces, and safe veterans. To learn more, please visit our website at safeproject.us. Now on to our presenter. Dylan Dunn has dedicated his career to transforming cultures, systems, and programs to empower individuals in recovery and those impacted by addiction and overdose. In his current professional role as the Assistant Director of Safe Campuses here at SAFE Project, Dylan has worked with students, staff, and faculty at over 500 college campuses and in all 50 states to implement holistic student support, harm reduction, and recovery programs, and provide professional development opportunities. Prior to his work at SAFE Project, Dylan served as a collegiate recovery program coordinator, where he developed and launched recovery support, stigma reduction, and naloxone availability programs. Dylan also served as a residence hall director, student conduct hearing officer, and case manager. Dylan holds a Master's of Science in Student Affairs in Higher Education from Colorado State University, as well as a Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy and a Bachelor of Arts in Criminology, Criminal Justice from the Ohio State University. Thanks so much, everyone. We're going to get started. Dylan, go for it.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Leslie. I always get more nervous doing virtual stuff because I can't see you all. Where in-person stuff, we can have fun and chat and joke around. So yeah, we're gonna talk today about how we think about substance use matters. This is a session that we give as regularly as we can. We've given this presentation at conferences with organizations, with communities who want to really have a conversation about what do we think about substance use. How does that come out and why does it matter? Like, what does this actually look like in practice? And so I'm going to walk you all through a bit of an abbreviated version of this today. I've done this in 30-minute versions, 60-minute versions. We've done full day mini conferences about this. But one thing we're going to do to get started is I want everyone to find either a scrap piece of paper and a writing utensil, or just open up a blank document on your computer. So we're going to go through an online survey, but kind of old school style. We're going to just kind of go through it question by question. In the chat here, I'm going to put in a couple of links. First is going to be the survey, in case you want it for reference. I can find it really quick. And then once we have the survey here, there's the survey. That should open up as a Google Doc, kind of just 32 question survey. I'm going to explain a little bit here first. So the plan is that we're going to understand the 4 paradigms model. It's a model that we've created here at SAFE. We're going to reflect on the results of that survey for each of you individually. And we're going to consider applications for collaboration, service, and professional development, or just personal development. I'll introduce it all. We'll talk about the survey and inventory. We'll go over the paradigms. We'll reflect on the results, and then we'll have some Q&A. So if you would like, feel free as we go through to ask questions in the chat. If things are not working, if they're confusing, if I'm talking too fast, if I'm talking too slow, if I made a bad joke, please leave all your questions, feedback, thoughts in the chat. Just make sure that your to identifier in your chat is to who you want it to go towards. So if you want it to go to everybody, send it to everybody. Just make sure you check that before you press send. Who am I? Leslie already introduced me. I'm from Ohio. I live in Colorado now. I've been at SAFE for over 5 years. Feel free, if you haven't already, introduce yourself in chat. Just a little bit extra. You may see my dog who's back in the corner right now. You may see him jump up on the bed or jump around and play. His name is Banjo. And then I also coach boxing on the side. So to get started here, let me make sure this is the right link. It is. Okay. You got the link in the chat to the survey. You can read through that if you want. I'm also just going to read through it with you. So have your scrap sheet of paper or your open document, number that sheet or that document 1 to 32. There are going to be 32 questions we go through. And in a way that can be frustrating for some, we're going to move through these questions pretty quickly. I'm going to read them aloud, and you're going to respond to every question, any number from 0 to 5. Hopefully stay with the whole numbers with me here. But 0 on this 0 to 5 scale means you never agree to the statement. You think it's silly. You would never, ever implement that or think that in your life. 5 to, of course, it's obvious. I always think that, or I always approach things that way. The challenge is that you're going to kind of have to navigate the middle of that scale based on vibes. Basically, how do you feel? What does it feel like for you? Most questions you'll probably score somewhere between 1 and 4, and that's okay. If you find yourself scoring only 0s and 5s, I encourage you to be a bit more thoughtful in your answers, but we will go quickly. So whatever comes out, and that's totally okay. As folks keep introducing themselves in the chat, I will put the link in one more time, just if you want. Oh, didn't mean to do that. If you want to refer to the questions and read along, you can. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to start reading. So again, 1 to 32 on your sheet, you're going to put a number 0 to 5 beside every number before we're done. First, the first statement that we're going to think about, again, reading it 0 to 5, is if our communities, workplaces, or schools normalize making better decisions, we can prevent substance misuse. Again, if our communities, workplaces, or schools normalize making better decisions, we can prevent substance misuse. When you hear that, which number comes to mind? 0 to 5, either from 0, I'd never agree with this, to 5, this is core to kind of who I am and how I think about this work. Number 2, quality of recovery can be measured by the alleviation of substance use disorder symptoms. Again, quality of recovery can be measured by alleviation of substance use disorder symptoms. Number 3, person-first language is useful as it helps us center the humanity of an individual over a diagnosis. Number 3, person-first language is useful as it helps us center the humanity of an individual over a diagnosis. Number 4, our understanding of addiction is largely shaped by the judgments we make about drugs and the people who use them. Number 4, our understanding of addiction is largely shaped by the judgments we make about drugs and the people who use them. So at this point, you should have these first 4 questions, all with a score 0 to 5 beside them on your sheet or in your little document you opened up. I will say, if any of these questions as we go through, there's still quite a few left. If anything sticks out and like you feel like it's difficult to score it because whatever reason, feel free to mark that in some way, whether it's highlighting it or circling it. Just mark it for yourself, because that'll be part of the discussion later of kind of what tripped you up a little bit. Number 5, stigma is one of the most harmful aspects of substance use disorder. Number 5, stigma is one of the most harmful aspects of substance use disorder. Number 6, the use of substances at an early age, before the brain is fully formed, is a clear cause of addiction. Number 6, use of substances at an early age, before the brain is fully formed, is a clear cause of addiction. Number 7, one of the most dangerous influences for a person with a substance use disorder is people who enable their addictive behaviors. Number 7, one of the most dangerous influences for a person with a substance use disorder is people who enable their addictive behaviors. Number 8, diagnosing someone with a substance use disorder is less important than helping someone define their personal relationship with substances. Number 8, diagnosing someone with a substance use disorder is less important than helping someone define their personal relationship with substances. As we continue forward, if I end up leaving you behind or you get stuck on a question, again, either circle it or this link I'm putting in chat. Feel free to open that up and read the question yourself. Question 9. Our focus on alcohol and other drugs often serves as a barrier to truly addressing underlying needs. Number 9, our focus on alcohol and other drugs often serves as a barrier to truly addressing underlying needs. Number 10, our culture's hypernormalization of substance use or substance misuse, makes recovery more difficult than it needs to be. Number 10, our culture's hypernormalization of substance misuse makes recovery more difficult than it needs to be. Number 11, addiction is a disease. Number 11, addiction is a disease. Number 12, recovery is a process of redemption and becoming a better person. Number 12, recovery is a process of redemption and becoming a better person. Almost halfway there. Number 13, it is critical that our communities, workplaces, and schools do not tolerate individuals or groups who use drugs. Number 13, it is critical that our communities, workplaces, and schools do not tolerate individuals or groups who use drugs. There are a couple questions that have those brackets. We often use those to customize the survey for different groups. So feel free to apply this to whichever of those groups is most personal to you. Number 14, abstinence is an important first step in overcoming addiction. Number 14, abstinence is an important first step in overcoming addiction. Number 15, recovery pathways should be unique and tailored to each individual on their own terms. Number 15, recovery pathways should be unique and tailored to each individual on their own terms. Number 16, halfway, stigma causes us to focus on social consequences of substance use rather than well-being and deeper causes of addiction. Number 16, stigma causes us to focus on social consequences of substance use rather than well-being and deeper causes of addiction. Number 17, substance use disorder should be diagnosed by a medical or mental health professional. 17, substance use disorder should be diagnosed by a medical or mental health professional. Number 18, if individuals knew more about substances, their use would decrease. Number 18, if individuals knew more about substances, their use would decrease. 19, people with substance use disorder know what is best for them, even if it includes continued use. Number 19, people with substance use disorder know what is best for them, even if it includes continued use. Number 20, there are fundamental differences between people with substance use disorder and those who can casually use substances. Number 20, there are fundamental differences between people with substance use disorder and those who can casually use substances. 12 more. 21, once someone develops an addiction, the addiction is part of them for the rest of their life. Once someone develops an addiction, the addiction is part of them for the rest of their life. 22, societal norms and prejudice heavily influence how we decide who does or does not have substance use disorder. 22, societal norms and prejudice heavily influence how we decide who does or does not have substance use disorder. 23, no matter the cause of addiction, individuals are responsible for their own recovery. 23, no matter the cause of addiction, individuals are responsible for their own recovery. 24, I struggle to fully trust someone when I learn that they use drugs. 24, I struggle to fully trust someone when I learn that they use drugs. Hopefully you're still awake with us. I know reading all these questions can be a bit sleepy, but we're almost done. 25, generalized approaches to treatment and recovery are very unlikely to be helpful. 25, generalized approaches to treatment and recovery are very unlikely to be helpful. 26, the perceived differences between illicit and prescription drugs are more indicative of stigma than science. 26, the perceived differences between illicit and prescription drugs are more indicative of stigma than science. 27, when I know that someone uses drugs or has a substance use disorder, I find myself wondering, are they intoxicated, high, or drunk when I interact with them? 27, when I know that someone uses drugs or has a substance use disorder, I find myself wondering, are they intoxicated, drunk, or high when I interact with them? And 28, addiction must be viewed in relation to co-occurring mental health conditions and traumas. 28, addiction must be viewed in Addiction must be viewed in relation to co-occurring mental health conditions and traumas. 28, addiction must be viewed in relation to co-occurring mental health conditions and traumas. Final group here. 29, one day we will discover a cure for addiction. 29, one day we will discover a cure for addiction. 30, when I talk about a person struggling with substance use, I refer to them as a person with a substance use disorder. 30, when I talk about someone struggling with substance use, I refer to them as a person with a substance use disorder. 31, the ways we define addiction are deeply bound in social and cultural context. 31, the ways we define addiction are deeply bound in social and cultural context. Last but not least, 32, approaches to treating addiction must be developed in ways that center the perspectives of those with lived experience. 32, approaches to treating addiction must be developed in ways that center the perspectives of those with lived experience. Okay, I'm gonna take a quick drink since I did a lot of reading and speaking. But you should now have a list of 32, each of them with at least one number, 0 to 5. Specifically, not at least one number, specifically one number, 0 to 5, beside each of your numbers 1 through 32. I want you to hold on to that list. We're going to go through what we call the 4 paradigms, and then we're going to actually give you 4 separate aggregate scores that explain those paradigms to you. If you're looking at the survey on the link I sent, don't worry about that yet. We'll go through that as we go. So just to kind of introduce things, we call this kind of the paradigm survey or the paradigms conversation. So the question to start with is first to kind of get on the same page of what in the world is a paradigm. According to the dictionary, yay for dictionary definitions, it's a noun. It's a framework containing basic assumptions, ways of thinking, and methodology that are commonly accepted by members of a scientific community. The second part of that is a cognitive framework shared by members of any discipline or group. Informally, a paradigm is a general mental model or a framework for anything. I've seen paradigm kind of get used more and more, at least now that I'm paying attention to the word paradigm more. I feel like I see it more often at conferences and as I'm reading through articles and things like that. But again, that could just be my own perception. But the thing here to be focused on is that paradigms shape 3 things very important to this conversation and important to substance use. First, they shape our how. So our general attitude and stance and the approaches that we see as valid. Our what, our actions and their associated outcomes, and our why, so our motivations and our end goals. As we go through, again, what we call the 4 paradigms, consider their pros, cons, and where you see it in our work. So when I say that, I mean substance use, addiction, mental health, recovery work. But think of it mostly for yourself. Where do you see it in your work? Where do you see it in the movement? So everybody get your typing fingers ready. And make sure your chat says to:everyone. I want you to answer this question publicly for us. Addiction is a A, condition, B, disease, C, disorder, or D, all of the above. So in the chat, put A, B, C, or D. Addiction is a condition, disease, disorder, or all of the above. A bunch of D's, you got a B, got two B's, a bunch of D's still coming through. Warming up our typing fingers, getting our keyboards ready. Cool, a lot of D's. Some of you have seen this before, and I got bad news. So D is not an answer anymore. If you could not answer D, if you had to really choose, addiction is either A, a condition, B, a disease, or C, a disorder. I'm going to put myself a little breaker here in the chat. Answer A, B, or C. Because the question here, and this is the way I want you to kind of frame your thoughts as we go through the paradigms, is yes, many of you did answer all of the above, which makes a whole lot of sense, right? The reality is, though, as we go through our days, we have to end up making choices. We can't answer every question every day with all of the above. I know that's not what we're kind of getting at here, but especially with substance use, when it comes to writing policies, creating programs, how we treat people, the quicker we go through our days, which a lot of us are very busy being busy, right? We end up making these decisions kind of step by step. Some of us make the same decision all day long. Some of us jump around a little bit. But in the chat here, I see A's, B's, C's, a good gamut here. And that's the point of this conversation we're going to have today, is it depends. And everyone kind of will have their own perspective here. If we were doing this in person, we had a couple hours, we would have a full discussion here of why A, why B, why C, and that'll come through also when we go through the rest of the exercise here. But again, the idea here is let's kind of kick out of autopilot here. Let's really think through each decision we make and think through the assumptions that do inform those decisions. So the cool thing here about this tool that we're going to work through is that when we track our beliefs and attitudes over time, we can then just develop a structure to reflect on the addiction and the recovery movement and find our role in it. There's history here to go through. There is context to dig into. There's culture to think about. But at the end of the day, I don't think this is controversial, that how we think about addiction matters. So we're going to go through each of the four paradigms one by one. We're going to go through the assumptions of that paradigm, kind of maybe some history about it, and then I'm going to have you do some math. Yes, math. If you need a calculator, please get the calculator ready. We're going to do some math to help you frame up what your score out of 40 is for that paradigm. But for first, we're going to talk about the moral paradigm and the tenets of it. So first, addiction and substance use is rooted in individual and group moral failings, character defects, and/or ignorance. The idea here being, if you knew better, you do better, and therefore you would be better. The second piece here is that recovery is about taking responsibility and/or making amends. Third, focuses on the individual and their role in the cause, alongside a focus on the impact on innocent bystanders. Next, there's a condemnation of bad influences. And finally, on this slide, ideally, a society should have no addiction and some would argue no substance use. A underlying idea here, but even beneath these underlying tenets, is that shame and threatening social connection or support can be utilized as a change motivator. You may be thinking to yourself, kind of, where do you see this in your life? What does this remind you of? But as we do that, I want you to actually use this scale on the screen here. So this is each question that falls under the moral paradigm according to this tool. I want you to take the question and the score and then add up your scores to all of these questions and get a number out of 40. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to do that. So for your moral paradigm, these are the questions, add up their answers, and you'll get a score out of 40. Once you get that score, write it big and bold on your sheet or in your document, circle it, keep hold of that for now. We're going to need all 4 of those questions here in a moment, or 4 of those scores here in a moment. If you're wildly confused, feel free to ask a question in chat. No one's going to be ashamed or disappointed. We're all working through it together. But 1 more minute here. if you want to put your scores in chat now, you can. Then we'll have an opportunity later for you to submit your scores onto a spreadsheet, so we'll all be able to see anonymously everybody's scores, and I'll actually send everybody or I'll show everybody the averages of those scores. So, yeah, if it's helpful for you to track them in chat or you want to share, please feel free. All right, as you keep doing this math, also I'll put the link in chat one more time for these tables of the scores are also on the last page of the document I just shared. So if you get left behind, feel free to catch up using that document. The next paradigm, yeah, Greg, that link I just put in the chat is the full survey. If you want to take the time to do the survey now, you can. It might take a little bit too long as we move forward, but that survey is totally available for you to look through and to use. And if you also want to set up a meeting with me, I'll put my email in afterwards. But the second paradigm here is the disease or the medical paradigm. We call it the disease paradigm quite a bit through this training, but please be aware that I may use those words interchangeably. But the core tenets here are that first, addiction is caused by physical, mental, or genetic deficiencies or abnormalities. Second, that people with substance use disorder are physically or chemically impaired. Third, there's a focus here on curing the problem, alleviating symptoms, or managing chronic issues. So addiction is a pathology. You test it, you identify it, and then you treat it. Fourth, addiction and recovery are to be understood through the perspectives of those with medical or clinical expertise. Many of us have heard the phrase, addiction is a disease, not a moral failing. That's important historically. That is in response to the moral model we just walked through. And that statement, addiction is a disease, not a moral failing, has been really valuable for progressing towards things like insurance coverage. We've been able to grow the treatment industry substantially because of that idea and that advocacy point. And it's also an approach to destigmatization. The important thing I'll point out here that I think can be helpful for folks is that statement that addiction is a disease actually precedes most research that seems to confirm this idea or seems to support this idea. The advocacy point of addiction being a disease was initially not a scientific necessarily perspective. It was an advocacy one. Of course, we do have plenty of research now that we can have a deep, deep conversation about what this means and how this has shown up in the research over the years, but that history can be important. So again, where do we see this? What does this look like? How does this show up in our lives? But as you think about that, feel free to complete this table here. Here's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 questions. You add up your scores to them and get another score out of 40. There is a history of this survey of people changing their answers as they go through this exercise of adding them up. I encourage you not to. This is meant to kind of measure your ways of doing before you think too hardly about it or too much about it, and to then kind of correct or feel like you have to correct your questions as you go through actually is counter to the tool. The idea is that there are no correct or incorrect answers to the vast majority of these questions, if not all of them. And that even the ones that we feel are really either decided or obvious are actually far more complicated than we think they are when it comes to practice. That's okay, Kimberly. Yeah, I'll put the link in the chat again. Feel free to go through the survey itself. This is the written kind of full survey with these scores in them. You'll have plenty of time to catch up if folks are falling behind a little bit. Okay. As you continue to go through the questions and do your math, hopefully you've written down your questions and your scores already and you're doing the math. I will move forward. If you ever need me to move back, feel free to let me know. But we're going to continue to move because we're halfway through the time already. So the third paradigm is the social paradigm. The core tenets here are that environmental factors create substance use disorder by first, developing conditions for coping or escape, or B, enforcing norms or expectations. So the idea of what use is acceptable and what isn't. And it is that distinction that actually develops what we do or do not think of as a substance use disorder. Second, substance use disorders are enforced through prejudice, stereotypes, and discrimination. Third, inflexible policies and procedures create barriers to inclusion and pragmatic approaches to support. Fourth, substance use disorder is more indicative of problems in our society than individual maladies. So it's more of again, a social issue. And then last in the bullets here, substance use disorder is culturally defined and intertwined with questions of diversity and inclusion. Two main pieces here at the bottom of the slide. Person first language. So many of you have heard that, the idea where we describe someone as a person with a substance use disorder or a person who uses drugs as opposed to an addict or an alcoholic. That is where the social paradigm is the most visible. And the focus of the social paradigm is reacting to and dismantling stigma. So again, I'm going to move onto the this math portion so that you can get to this if you want. But I want to explain something while we do this. I know that can be distracting, but the social paradigm is where the kind of the heart and soul of this survey becomes a bit more obvious to folks and also can be a bit more challenging. These paradigms are really just the paradigms that come from the disability movement over time. And so the social paradigm and the disability movement is the idea that people who use wheelchairs are not disabled because they're in a wheelchair. They're disabled because our environment is not suitable for them. If we were to have wheelchair accessible buildings and everything, being in a wheelchair would not be a disability anymore. It's kind of is a very simplification of the perspective here. And so this is an application of that towards substance use disorder. And so if substance use wasn't so stigmatized, wasn't so judged, wasn't so criminalized, then maybe substance use disorder would be a little bit less of an issue, which can be a really complicated thought to have. And at the same time, we know that stigma is important and stigma is valuable to dismantle and to get rid of. It's a big part of our work at Safe Project. So I just want to kind of dig into the heart and soul of that here, because that'll make more sense moving forward. But I'll give you some time in silence, so I'm not distracting you, to do the math here. A few more seconds. As we get into the final paradigm, I just shared a link in the chat. If you click on that, it will open up an Excel sheet. And that Excel sheet is an opportunity for you to kind of claim your row and write in your scores. For anybody who's willing to do that, it will actually give us an average of our audience today, so we can kind of hear and see what that will be. And so, yeah, feel free to, if you are working ahead or you've kind of been doing your math pretty quickly, feel free to submit your scores in that spreadsheet. It is okay if you jump down to like the 25th row just because you don't want to kind of get lost in the shuffle of the first 10. It's fine. It will average out all the scores either way. So the last paradigm here is what we call the neurodiversity, or what we will mostly call today the identity paradigm. The tenets here are that first, relationships that individuals have with substance use can be incredibly complex and diverse. Labels serve to develop somewhat arbitrary groups and can be more accurately understood as spectrums. So this is, that it's not that you do or don't have an addiction, that you do or don't have substance use disorder, is that it's really complicated. And some people use drugs but aren't in developing or even experiencing a substance use disorder at all. Some people have used a couple of times and feel like they've really developed a disorder, or feel like they've had a heavy impact. That should be clear there. And that everybody has their own journey here. And so those spectrums are useful. Second, substance use is not inherently pathological, negative, tragic, or unhealthy. Instead, it can be valuable when truly understood. Third, neuronormative standards and stigma about people who use drugs are what cause the most harm. Neuronormative here means that there is a normal brain or normal way of using our brain or thinking or doing, and there's a not normal way. Again, this kind of idea that these good or bad or normal or not normal ideas can be less useful for identity work. Fourth is that we need to listen to people with a relationship to addiction and or substance use to understand what well-being looks like for them. the purpose here of this entire paradigm really is empowerment. And so empowerment of a positive self-identity and agency. So the idea that someone can make choices for themselves and lead their own destiny, their own lives, their own outcomes. That's really the focus here. And so again, comparing this to the disability movement, this is the idea that things like developmental disorders are really complicated. This idea that there is a correct way to think and a correct way to focus or a correct way to do, and then therefore the assumption that there are incorrect ways of being and incorrect ways of doing ends up actually harming people and causing just a failure to understand the complexity of the world around us. So instead, if we can help folks understand the way that their brain works, for example, or that their social interactions work, we can better empower them to do what they need. The final scores here, to finish our math portion of the conversation today, is these final questions, add them up, and then feel free to put your scores, all 4 of them, into that spreadsheet. Yes, so Kim asked in the chat, do you just pick any column or any row as soon as what you're asking? You can put your score in any row. I would just say if you see someone else is already typing in your row, don't choose that one. But there are plenty of rows. I think there's 50 rows. And so feel free to pick any row from 1 to 50 that's empty and put your scores in there. This isn't mandatory. It's just to help us kind of look through and be able to see what the kind of average score of the audience is today. As we start to see the scores populate into the spreadsheet, one of the common kind of thoughts I encourage folks to kind of make sense of is what would it be like to have to be a person whose scores are perfectly equal across all 4 paradigms? In the last presentation I gave of this session, there was 2 kind of challenging perspectives that were in opposition of each other. One is that person must be almost paralyzed by decisions every day, that it must be so hard to decide which of these paradigms, if they were thinking of it that way, is most important to me. Yes, Suzanne, you can submit at any point if you want. And so it's either this idea that there are so many contradictions within this person that it's almost impossible to act and everything feels really difficult. Or there's this other perspective that it's okay to have fully equal paradigms across the board, because maybe that means you're really pragmatic and thoughtful and are willing to kind of put on, quote unquote, a different hat in every different situation. I think we could have a full discussion about that if we wanted to. I think it's interesting, but maybe something to think about if you're sitting around waiting for people to put their scores in. But looks like most people have their scores in already. I'll go to here. So far, our average highest score in terms of paradigm is a social paradigm. The next highest average score is identity, then disease, then moral. But everything is only 7 points distribute or differentiate all 4 paradigms. So 23 with disease and 30 with social. This is a pretty common spread that we see when we do this survey. We see, for example, kind of our older generations seem to have quite a bit higher moral and disease scores, where in our work with this, as we've done kind of averages over time, the younger kind of upcoming, especially college age generation, seems to be really focused on social and identity right now. Kim, I'll put yours in the spreadsheet for you. No worries. 25, 25, 36, 32. Okay. Kim, yours are on row 22. So yeah, thank you all for sharing. We use these averages just to kind of test the survey and to see what folks are thinking and what they're kind of going through. So in the chat, feel free to share any of your initial thoughts, reactions, or reflections to your results and just what this experience is like at all. Particularly what we can talk about, if you'd like, is if anything was surprising or if there's anything you want to dig more into. I'm not sure what our capabilities of this webinar are if we can unmute people, but feel free if you want to put some initial thoughts in kind of what this experience is like or what thoughts are coming to mind now, throw them in chat and we'll discuss a little bit. You have about 20 minutes left. we're unable to unmute you. So if you have good typing fingers, it's time to start typing. Yeah, feel free to share thoughts. Yeah, so Brianna says, I was surprised at first to see my score for the disease section until it was explained a bit, and now I feel like it makes total sense. Some people get very caught up in the labels, especially like the moral model, which, I mean, there is some more morality and some judgment in there, but some people will be like, oh no, I have to have a 0 for that one, because it feels judgmental. But at the end of the day, we live in a culture where stigma exists, and we all have to kind of be discerning, and sometimes that shows up as judgment. Thank you, Cal. As folks, if you are still typing, please continue. We're going to go into some additional conversations. But if you want to continue on to a different question, one thing we like to talk about is, do conflicts between any of the paradigms show up in your work or personal life? And so where do you notice tension between the paradigms? One example that I like to give, just to kind of be transparent. Just quickly, Amy had asked, so we would want a higher or lower number for each section. I was worried how I scored. You don't really want anything with the paradigms. You just, the answers are, the results are the results. They're meant to be reflective of what your answers were, not correct or incorrect in any sense. And so if you maybe were taking the survey as ooh, what is the correct answer? You might want to retake the survey, just in that it's not about anybody being correct. It's about how do you act, or how do you choose, or how do you think? And that is just more for self-awareness. Yeah, so in work there, Suzanne had shared that in their work as a teacher, there's a lot of stigma against substance use, but in the social circle, there's much less stigma. I see this a lot in, especially when I work with college campuses. I see there's a lot of work to keep students from using, and then I see professors and staff leave those meetings to go use or drink together, depending on what they're up to. But it can be hard for me to navigate. And so, yeah, it's definitely something that I find in every situation, whether it's workplaces. Yeah, and what I was going to say before was that I find that in my personal life, I find that it's very easy to fall into the moral model of, like, when my dad was deep into his opioid use disorder, I was very hurt, and I found it very easy to get very judgmental and moralizing about it. But I would leave a call with him, be really upset, breathe, and then go to work, and then just be incredibly social identity focused, a bit more loose with my clients, but not quite sure what to do to make sense of that. So yeah, again, there's a perfect or an imperfect paradigm, but that there's conflicts between them that kind of end up coloring our world quite a bit. Yeah, and so the question, is there something I need to work on when you go through this? When you see your scores, it can be a really important reflection of, is this what I want to see? Is this who I want to be? Is this the work I'm meant to do? Things like that. There is a way of asking yourself that question without judging yourself and kind of moralizing yourself. I think if you can find, or even if you want to chat afterwards on kind of what that approach can look like, that can be a really fun outcome of this survey. Cal had shared that tensions in workplaces between non-judgment to reduce stigma and understanding why business leaders may wish to regulate substance use. Totally. That's the pragmatic side of this, right? Is we have to both get the job done in workplaces and in life, get the job done, and is judgment or shame necessary to keep the job getting done? Is a really important question. Yeah. Yeah, the personal side of things. Yeah. Yeah, if y'all want to read the chat, there's a lot in here, which is nice. It's a lot of interesting stories here. I'm in school for social work, and I feel like my understanding continuously grows, whereas those in my personal circle do not have the same understanding or knowledge. And I often find myself wanting them to be open to more possibilities, or to think about things in a different and less judgmental way. Yeah. There are surely parts of the survey that do come down to awareness, but at the end of the day, the challenging part for our work at SAFE, for example, is that because we work in so many different fields and locations and perspectives and cultures, for example, the disease model can feel stigmatizing to folks. And there's some research that we'll share at the end that kind of makes sense of that. And so we may say, ooh, you should be in the identity of the social model, not the disease model. But for example, if I'm a doctor, if I'm a clinician, the disease model has some really important tools for me there. It might not get the same outcome as someone in a different perspective, in a different situation, looking to use a different model or a different paradigm, but can we at least dance with them? Or if we're looking to partner, can we partner well? And Leslie had shared that there's a lot of conflicts with state organizations who have an idea of what recovery should look like when it comes to policy that perpetuates stigma, things like that. Yeah, 1,000%. So we're going to keep going. Keep thoughts coming through the chat because we're going to keep talking through these things. Especially, we're going to dig into a few of the most controversial questions in the survey. I did not have time again today to go through all of your responses and look at what was the most controversial among y'all's. But these tend to be pretty stable throughout the different audiences, no matter who the audience is, that there are a common group of questions that are most controversial, meaning a lot of people either score 0 or 1 or 4 or 5. And so we're going to go through a couple of them here. So as I read the questions back, if you're interested, I would like you to share your score of how you scored it in the chat. And then if you want to then elaborate of what kind of drew you to that answer or what would be the implications of this question, I will also, just because we're not able to unmute today, I might just kind of pontificate a bit or kind of talk openly about what we see commonly as the outcomes of these. Yeah. So I'll pause for a second real quick and just catch up on chat. Lauren had said, I was surprised at the first question under questions to consider. Addiction is an A condition, B disease, C disorder, all of the above. Lauren, thank you for this. I know Lauren's question went into the host panelists. So also, folks, if you see in your when you go to type a question in chat or type a message in chat, it'll say 2. If it says hosts or panelists, please change that to everyone so we can all see each other's chats. To see a lot of things coming through to hosts and panelists. So it's okay for me to read them out loud. But Lauren had a really great point that many of us trained in this work have been told over and over again that substance use disorder is a disease, but the name of it is substance use disorder. Is there a difference? Great question. I wish it's both very simple in that it's just both. And it can be really important if we're having this framework today, that it's also important to be clear about language and what could that mean if we're saying it's one thing, but the name indicates another, or what's the difference between a disease and a disorder? There are people at SAFE who are on this call who probably think Dylan's annoying. He does this stuff all day long. He tries to differentiate this stuff all day long and it slows things down. It's just because that's who I am. So again, I need to partner with folks who are not interested in this stuff as much as I am so we can keep things moving forward. But I'll say that. So yes, Lauren, if you want to dig into that pretty directly, there's a recovery ally training that we have that's the first chapter. And so that first chapter is live. I can put that link in, or if one of the SAFE Project staff is able to find that Thinkific link, that first chapter is live on our online course. The other chapters are coming later, but that's kind of the first distinction we'd make in that training. So to get through the rest of the content here, we got 12 minutes. So I'm going to go a little bit quicker. Is the first kind of controversial question that we get to, which I absolutely understand, is that recovery is a process of redemption and becoming a better person. Again, if you want to share your scores for this one, feel free, or kind of what drew you to your answer. The common thoughts we get here is that recovery is a beautiful journey. And so should we not celebrate it and be really proud of people? My answer is, of course we should, personally. I don't think that's controversial either. Where there are folks who go, oops, this statement is not for me, is the idea of redemption being that someone was broken or less than, and that they have had to overcome that. And that becoming a better person entails that they may have been a less better person, or they must have been a broken or a not good person to have needed recovery. Am I saying that if you scored a 5 on this, that you are therefore a bad person and you have moralized people? No, I think it's more of, ooh, if we slow and be clear, we then choose, is this the way I think or is it not? And that's just, yeah. So Brianna is the exact same thing I was saying. It's great. Just a perspective here, which again is not meant to override or be better than the folks who scored this a 5. Is just, yeah, there are some people who see this and go, yep, this is exactly what I know, what I think, what I believe, this is what I've lived through. And there are other folks who go, oops, if I think about this too much, it makes me think there's a lot of judgment here. Yeah. So we see some 5s, a 1, a 2, another 2. Yeah. So again, this is a good example of how complicated this can get, and also how controversial it can be once we slow down. The next one here is no matter the cause of addiction, individuals are responsible for their own recovery. And if you want to share your score in the chat, what drew you to your answer? I'll talk about the third piece here, which is what are the implications of this question. This is very similar to the last one, where people often are very, very passionate and proud of the idea that individuals are responsible for their own recovery. That is, it can be really, there's a lot of dignity in that. Of if I am responsible for my own recovery, then you can't take it from me. You can't, your judgment doesn't matter to me because it's mine. And then there's the first side of this, which is no matter the cause. Some folks, maybe from the social perspective or the social paradigm, may say, pause, the cause absolutely does matter. Because maybe the cause was trauma. Maybe the cause was racism. Maybe the cause was these systematic issues that if we fixed those issues, the recovery would have never been necessary. This is where things get controversial as people go, oop, no matter the cause is what's important. Other people will say the individual dignity and responsibility is what's really important. So yeah, a lot of 4s and 5s in this audience, which isn't surprising, right? A lot of people will score 0s, 4s, 0s or 1s, 4s or 5s on these. And typically we do see when it comes to answering these questions that folks who answer the 4s and 5s are the folks that are more willing to share publicly. Yes, Lauren had said, as someone in long-term recovery, I did need the help of others, but it was up to me to come to the realization I needed to be willing to do whatever it took and whatever was asked of me, and also had to reach out for help in the first place. Yeah. Yeah, and so I hear a lot of my 12-step program in this. Totally, Cal had said, kind of in the middle, I believe the power of peer and support, but also I had support when I needed it most and did not at the time have strength to recover solo. Totally. Yeah. Yes, the idea that a lot of you are kind of echoing is the idea that folks have to want it for themselves, which is very common in the recovery communities that we hear that perspective. This is where the rubber meets the road a lot of times, where we get kind of almost some real hard arguments when we do this in person, which is the idea that abstinence is an important first step in overcoming addiction. Again, if you want to share your score here, feel free and what drew you to your answer. There are many folks who believe this is non-negotiable. And there are other folks in the chat who think absolutely not. It's not required. It doesn't have to be the first step. This is kind of the classic conflict within the recovery community over the past, I don't know, maybe forever. Yeah, like Anna, if we were in person, I'd ask you really carefully to not, I would be careful in how I asked you, would you be willing to share your 3? Because I think the 3s, there's a lot to dig in, and maybe sometimes 3s are folks who are kind of sitting on the fence of like, oh, I don't know, I'm not sure. And other people are like, I'm in the 3 because I believe yes and no at the same time, and it hurts. I'm not sure what to do about it. And now here the 0s come in. Yeah, so we have 5s, we have 0s. This feels often like an all or nothing question. You believe it or you don't. And we could set up SAFE Project could set up a 5-day long conference where we have debate after debate after debate about what this means, why it's important, what each side believes, what data they use, what perspectives are most important to believing yes or no on this. And that's the heart of the paradigms survey here. And so, and Lauren, the perspective being that once you've stopped using, the healing starts. And there are folks who are in very active recovery and are not abstinent. And the question here can be, do you have to be abstinent from all substances, or do you have to be abstinent from the substance of the most problem substance? Or yeah, and Amy's saying, but I don't see it working for most people without abstinence. The data would argue with that pretty heavily. The data is more moderate and more in the middle than yes or no. I think the most recent data from the Recovery Research Institute was, I think, 45% of people who would be identified as in recovery currently use substances. And so it's when we say we don't see it, it's because those people don't then stick around the recovery community as much, maybe because they don't feel welcome there. They don't feel that's important for them. So there's a lot of beautiful conversation to have here. And anybody that knows me on this call knows that I love the beauty of a hard conversation. If I peddle anything in my work, it's hard conversations. And then, yes, Amy, perfect next step is, well, what do we consider a substance? Is it medications for medication-assisted recovery? Is it any illicit substance? Does it include alcohol? Does it not include alcohol? What are we talking about? That's the point of the survey, is can we then have this conflict and then dig in, right? And the chat is moving. I love to see it. Yeah. Yep. We're going to keep moving because, again, I wish we had infinite time, but we have 5 minutes. I'm not going to dig into this one too much, but this question is pretty controversial according to the results that we often get, is that diagnosing someone with a substance use disorder is less important than helping someone define their personal relationship with substances. So this is the idea that our understanding of self is far more important than someone else's understanding of you, especially if they have a power dynamic when it comes to a medical perspective or a clinical perspective. So helping someone define their own relationship is more important than diagnosing them as yes or no. The next one here is if we normalize making better decisions, we can prevent substance misuse. We're going to continue through that one. The way there's a couple slides here to conclude, because again, we have 4 minutes left. On this slide are the 5 sentiments that folks seem to agree to the most. As I read through these, just kind of check in with yourself. Does this make sense, or is anything surprising here? First, person-first language is useful as it helps us center the humanity of an individual over a diagnosis. Second, stigma is one of the most harmful aspects of substance use disorder. Third, recovery pathways should be unique and tailored to each individual on their own terms. Fourth, addiction must be viewed in relation to co-occurring mental health conditions and traumas. Fifth, approaches to treating addiction must be developed in ways that center the perspectives of those with lived experience. The sentiments agreed to the least in our testing so far is first that it is critical for our communities, workplaces, or schools to not tolerate individuals or groups who use drugs. Second, that abstinence is an important first step in overcoming addiction. Third, if individuals knew more about substances, their use would decrease. Fourth, I maintain a level of skepticism about someone once I learn that they use drugs. And fifth, one day we will discover a cure for addiction. Again, is anything surprising here for you? Does anything kind of stick out based on the conversations we've had? Again, this previous slide was just, this had the most 4s and 5s. This slide this had the most 0s and 1s. The thing to take away today, especially if you do this work professionally, is how can you use your understanding of paradigms to better manage collaborative partnerships? A couple of things that I'll point out because we don't have time to discuss this as much as I wish we did. First is self-awareness is always going to be important. Next, if you feel like, for example, I am not a disease model person, I struggle with it, I can dance with it, but I'm not going to be the one to educate on it. It's just not my area of expertise. So if I were to go do, for example, a medical conference, I'm going to partner with someone at SAFE who maybe has a better understanding of the medical model. And we're going to partner so that we can have a more productive conversation with our medical friends about the work we're trying to do. Can you be strategic and also incredibly self-aware using these paradigms? The thing that folks leave with is this idea that there are answers to any of this. The idea is not that there are answers, but there are trade-offs. So this is research on this slide. It's a really complicated slide. I'm going to try my best to go through it in a minute. Is that John Kelly from Harvard, his research from a couple years ago said that researchers found that there is not one single term that can reduce all potential stigma biases. We found that while some terms were very good at reducing certain types of stigma, these same terms increased other types of stigma and vice versa. So the classic distinction here is that addiction is either a brain disease or a medical issue, or it's a behavioral issue or a social issue. This is what the research that they did found. If you describe addiction as a medical issue or a brain disease, you alleviate stigma and you get rid of stigma around the idea that people with substance use disorder, so PWSUD, you get rid of the stigma that they're to blame for their substance use, and you get rid of the stigma that they should be excluded for their substance use. But you increase stigma around the idea that they can't recover and that they are potentially dangerous. The other side of this is that if you use behavioral health or social language, you may increase stigma around blame and around exclusion because, oh, it's just a social issue. It's their fault. They should be held accountable. But you can alleviate stigma around the idea that they are therefore not dangerous because it's just a social issue and that they can recover because social issues can be changed. And so the final quote here is that if you want to decrease stigmatizing blame, use more medical terminology. If you want to increase confidence that the person can recover and is not dangerous, use non-medical terminology. But there is always the trade-off. And so it's not that I need you to decide. If you are someone who wants to decide, find friends who can help you dance here. But if you find your scores are more kind of in the middle, all 20s and 30s, or all kind of closer together than you would expect them to be, it's because you tend to be someone who maybe dances here. The challenge is, do your actions reflect the complexity of what you're thinking and what you're doing, or are your outcomes reflecting the intent that you have? I'll skip this slide. The outcomes here, the takeaways as we run out of time here, are a few. Self-awareness leads to greater intentionality within a stigmatized topic like substance use disorder and substance use in general. So the questions to think about: who do we listen to, or what perspectives do we defer to? What goals do we work towards? What more do we have to learn? What conflicts can be traced to tensions between these paradigms? And how does our perspective, expertise, or bias relate to our work, school, and our community? And with that, I thank you. Thanks for chatting. Thanks for hanging out. I always appreciate folks engaging in this. And so, yes, Brianna, we'll share the recording, and also you can get access to the slides whenever. I'll put my email on the slide because it's already there. Leslie, I'll pass over to you since I'm running over time.
No, you're fine. Thank you all so much. And as Dylan mentioned, and as I said earlier, we will send a follow-up email with a link to the recording as well as a link to the slide deck. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.